Also, many of you getting in touch, and I really do appreciate this, about the child maintenance stories, your own examples, on either sides of this really important issue that I don't think is talked about enough, because we want a system that works, that's accurate, that ensures parents pay for their responsibilities, but also doesn't actually prejudice and penalise and send people to prison or far worse. We'll be talking shortly to Charlie Peters about some of those stories that have come in. We're also just going to look at this issue of liability orders, because those are the orders that essentially, that's the legal ruling for payments to take money from a paying parent's account. And I've got a clip here about how they now raise these liability orders in bulk. Just take a look at this.
Are you ironing out with systemic delays? The liability order that I talked about earlier, which is the legal recognition of a debt, is legislative for us. You know, and that requires you to take that to court. HMCTS have been fantastic in working with us, and I think the report reflects that. In moving to digital courts, where we take bulk liability orders, 100, 200 at a time, to speed things up rather than individual court appearances. So we are making progress on the liability order part of the process. Sanctions, unfortunately, is a personal appearance in court. Again, we keep working closely with the court service to see if we can speed that up. But some of it is legislated, and we can't get away from the fact that you need a liability order to move forward.
So you need a liability order to move forward, and that's fine. But we want these things to be accurate. That absolutely is a key thing. Otherwise, you end up with errors on either side of it, and we've got lots of messages coming in. And it seems that under some new legislation that's coming, you don't even need to go to court now for these liability orders. But that's the question. If the calculations are patently wrong, where's the redress? Where does this actually stop? Just take a look at this clip again from a select committee.
And so this bill makes important improvements to CMS enforcement processes by amending existing powers. Once commenced, this will allow the Secretary of State to make an administrative liability order where the paying parent has failed to pay an amount of child maintenance without the need to make an application to court.
Well, there we are. So applications don't need to go to court. And some might say that improves the administration, makes it quicker and faster to ensure that non-resident paying parents pay. And that's fine, as long as it's accurate. Well, joining me now is a retired solicitor who's got experience of working with the CMS, Richard Visick. Richard, thank you for joining me this afternoon on this important issue. Just tell us about your experience of working with the CMS. Obviously, it's a big department, it's a very important issue. What's your experience of your sense of their ability to get things right?
Well, what you've just shown with your earlier interview with Mark and Lee just shows exactly the sort of problems happen on a very wide scale indeed. And obviously, I'm very sorry to hear the story you showed earlier with that. And obviously, the latest changes they're making are going to make the situation even worse, because it's going to give the CMS the power to actually issue, a bit like the post office, you know, they can actually be prosecutors and then carry out administrative liability orders very quickly, without the ability, as you said, saw earlier, with the challenging of the actual calculation. So that's highly unfair on the people like your Mark and Lee earlier today. I mean, just on Mark and Lee, I'm very happy to write a letter in connection with that if they have these problems in the future, obviously likely to do with the way the CMS is, and in connection with this programme. Also, I would like to thank yourselves at the Reform Party for actually voicing these concerns, because usually when I take part in these consultation papers, no one at all actually seems to be writing in on a professional basis, if that makes sense. A lot of people of us in the profession are actually quite scared, to be honest.
Really? So when you say that, scared because you're dealing with a government department or because of future work? Why would people be scared?
It's both of those things, really, because at the end of the day, there's quite a lot of pressure not to do that. So it is even I'm actually feeling scared as I speak now, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, Richard, well, I'm hugely grateful that you have come on to talk about it. And, you know, when you are nervous of that, I think whistleblowing, it's really important, because at the end of the day, we all just want to get this right. We want the calculations to be accurate, to people to pay promptly. And I think all of us who pay taxes and We just want the government departments to get stuff organised. And when you touched on, and I used the same concerns about another post office scandal, it feels to me that we've got to put pressure and we've got to have the courage to call out this department, to say, come on, folks, you surely can do a lot better than this.
Absolutely. There's nowhere for people like Mark and Lee to go, and the idea of having to travel miles and miles for a court hearing only being given a month, which quite frankly, even as a solicitor, it's actually very hard to actually do that and work out what to do with an appeal process. That's very nerve-wracking as well, quite frankly, especially when it's completely unfair and wrong in its calculations. So there are definitely problems in that area.
And I think that's right. And indeed, Mark and Lee, they were nervous talking about it here in the studio. I'm incredibly grateful they did. And just finally, Richard, there's the ability to change a calculation. How does that work? And is that sensible and fair if your income has changed?
It's very, very difficult because you get 25%. If your income goes down by 25% or more, then they will change it. But it takes 3 months plus extra time of processing. So effectively, you have someone who's down 24%, let's say, there's no change in the income, which is very, very difficult for people in that situation. And worse than that, the CMS is tightening up on enforcement at the moment and broadening its reach generally. And at the same time, it's not actually given access for other, people who are in the position, Mark and Lee, to say, well, my expenses have gone up. As we know, inflation has rocketed, interest rates have got, those are not even taken into consideration. So you've got a horrific cocktail there of problems for people facing this situation with the CMS. And
on the other side of it, Richard, in your experience, because already we're getting lots of comments coming in, there are people on the other side who are saying that that their former partner haven't paid for years, and the CMS says there's nothing they can do about it. It feels to me it's like neither side is happy in this.
It's a difficult problem, obviously, but the problem about enforcing too hard is, and certainly the cases I've seen, quite often they are wrong about the calculations. They don't give, even when someone wants to pay and can pay, they actually just suddenly go off and put a garnishee order against the employer to get the money out, which damages their reputation. So they're very, very aggressive with the CMS. And I think they should be almost working with the actual paying parent, for example, to give them more chance to look at how they can reschedule debts and actually even write off debts. But this money isn't going to be got by from the CMS the way they're actually trying to do it.
So that's a key point. So finally, Richard, almost like, could you not have like an interim payment while the calculations are being clarified and got exactly right? At least if an interim payment was agreed faster, that might be a sort of halfway house compromise solution.
I think it's a very good idea, but the CMS are very hard to get hold of. So it was on something like where Mark and Lee were there. There's actually very hard for them to get in touch with somebody who can actually make those decisions, or even actually to deal with their queries, so to speak. I mean, it's actually hard to even get a balance on the computer on your CMS account.
Sounds like hard to talk to any
post office, to be honest, yeah.
It's hard to talk to anybody down any sort of outsourcing service or anything, HMRC or whatever. Richard Visick, thank you so much as a retired solicitor for joining us and sharing that. And as Richard said, actually, also nervous himself about talk about this. Charlie Peters is joining me in the studio. I mean, this is a big topic. There's obviously lots of different sides to it. You've heard there from Richard, who's sort of nervous about talking about it. But we're getting loads and loads of people writing in, including, I think you've got a couple of examples, Charlie, people where they've sort of clarified what's due but not being paid.
That's right. It's interesting to hear Richard saying that he is concerned about the wide scale of so many of these problems on the same day that the government is announcing its response to a consultation to bring in more enforcement powers and actually speeding up the enforcement process. So as we understand it, that's going to go from 6 months to 6 weeks. That's the government's aim. And within that, all sorts of figures are being bandied around today. We've heard in the week that some 78,000 parents are not paying in full the amount that's owed. And today the government is saying that 10,000 parents are refusing to pay whatsoever.
So these are massive numbers. 10,000 refusing to pay, nearly 80,000 where the number's clearly not quite right. Huge, huge numbers. And yet the government's getting more aggressive with enforcement. But if you can't make the calculations right, then, I mean, is the idea of having an interim payment, or maybe that already happens?
Well, the question for the government, I think, today, from many paying parents and from the people we've been speaking to, is that how can you be sure that of those 78,000 or 10,000, many are not facing false debts and false arrears that have been put on them due to a punitive measure to take more cash from them with false calculations? This is the allegation that we're hearing. And to hear also some of the plans the government is making within that process. We know that they can disqualify driving licences, to take charging orders on homes. Earlier in the week, this week in the Commons, Therese Coffey said that curfew orders should be to put on paying parents.
So the government seems to be looking at it on one side, and you touched on the sort of the inflation of arrears. Let's just take a look. I think we've got one more clip of a select committee about the deliberate exaggeration of sums due. Let's just take a look.
There's some severe question marks over the figure of 3.8. I think that the work that the department has done, CMEC has done, identifies that going back many years, we used to create something called an interim maintenance arrangement. Essentially, it was a number that was brought up to say to the non-resident parent, this is how much you'll have to pay. Actually used as a bit of a lever when they wouldn't give us their pay and information, which we have to ask for. So actually, it was inflated. It seems to be inflated by about 300%. So when they didn't pay, all those numbers have gone into the arrears. So the truth is actually those arrears are somewhat inflated because of the tools that were used, up to 18 years ago.
I mean, that's pretty shocking that they're deliberately inflating arrears to encourage people to pay. And yet, I'm going to read again the Department of Work and Pensions response on this, because they think that it all seems to be accurate. They say child maintenance payments help around 160,000 children out of poverty each year, and they continue to improve the CMS through automating simple processes and spending more time with vulnerable customers. Well, I have to say, that doesn't seem to be the experience so far, but we could be being a bit too selective. They also go on to say CMS payments are calculated to be reasonable, affordable for the paying parent, and decisions can be appealed, and a court will decide if they're wrong. Well, I don't think that's right, because the court doesn't decide if they're wrong. The court just approves the liability orders. I'll keep on reading their statement, which says there are appeal rights for paying parents when the CMS intends to take enforcement action. It does feel, Charlie, finally, a bit of a mess that needs sorting out. Otherwise, we're going to end up like another post office scandal.
And so many parents have been speaking to GB News over the last couple of months about their experiences here, about their failure to get answers, about their failure to get the information they need and the clarification on the debts they know. And frankly, what they are saying is a failing bureaucracy that is not responding to their concerns. And that has a detrimental impact on their livelihoods and their mental health. And we've heard some really appalling and very worrying testimony along those lines.
We have, and so it's vital just to get it right, so that the due payments can be made promptly and swiftly. And we said, parents must live up to their responsibilities to their children. For sure, we get that. But it does feel to me that this is a real mess. And it feels to me, from the DWP's statement, what concerns me is they don't seem to be recognising that there's lots of errors, just ploughing on with ever greater enforcement. And I spoke to two relatives where tragically there were suicides in their family. I know, Charlie, you're going to keep abreast of this. Look at the many comments coming in. I really do appreciate it. Please do keep those thoughts, experiences coming in from both sides of it, including where actually the sum is agreed, but the parent isn't paying. Charlie Peters, an important topic that we at GB News will keep abreast of. Thank you very much indeed.